Whenever we get defensive, I think we use one of three basic formats for expressing our defensiveness, and these are the same, I think, in both war and in communication. And they are surrender, withdrawal, and counterattack. We typically think of surrender as the most passive and counterattack as the most aggressive. I actually believe that within each of these three categories of defense, there is both a passive and an aggressive format. So when we surrender, the most passive form of surrender is what I call surrender betray. And that's when we actually betray ourselves and our own position by seeing reality and even seeing our own behavior or emotions or attitudes through the lens of somebody who's mistreating us. So you might have somebody at home who's overly critical, and your response to that is to say, well, I really understand why that person got angry at me because I shouldn't have brought that topic up just then. Or, even if the kids were sick, I should have made sure I had dinner ready on time. Or at work, we might make excuses for a coworker who's being sharp or rude with us. And in life, this would be often referred to as being the codependent personality type. In war, it's considered to be the Stockholm syndrome, where the person who's captured begins to bond with the person who captured them and has more loyalty to the enemy than they do to themselves or perhaps to the country they're fighting for. The second form of more aggressive defense in the category of surrender is what I call surrender-sabotage. And this one would be typically what we think of as passive-aggressive behavior, where I might apologize to you, but my apology isn't really real. So I may say, well, gee, I'm really sorry you took it that way. And, well, let's see, what does that mean? I guess I'm sorry you were too stupid to understand what I really meant. So you're giving the apology, but it's not real. So underneath it is still another kind of poke or jab. Or you may be deciding whether to go to the mountains today or to the beach. And the family wants to go to the beach and you would prefer to go to the mountains, but you say, okay, fine, let's go to the beach. So you see my body language and my shrug and what's going to happen when I go to the beach. We're going to get over there and I'm probably going to say something like, well, I knew it was going to be foggy over here today, or I knew it'd be windy, and I'm going to be in a bad mood, and so I'm going to sabotage everybody. So I said, okay, let's go. But it was really a surrender, and I resented it, and I showed my resentment. And of course, this kind of surrender and sabotage happens in the workplace all the time as well. The second form of defense is withdrawal. And the more passive form of withdrawal is to avoid conflict, to not want to engage in conflict. And in this case, the person often finds themselves feeling caught in the middle between other people's conflicts, and they try to appease one person and then the other person, but sometimes that even gets more difficult for them, because then both people think, oh, Sharon's on my side, and the other one's thinking Sharon's on my side, because I'm not really taking my own personal position with either person. And so people who surrender and, people who withdraw and want to escape conflict don't necessarily look passive, even though I would say it's the passive personality type, because they might have a great deal of charisma, they might even be a leader in a community, but they're very conflict phobic if this is one of their main defenses. Now there's a second form of withdrawal that's very aggressive, and it's what I call withdrawn trap. In a meeting at work or at home, the person who sits in their chair and is folding their arms and is folding their arms and just kind of glowering and not being very responsive, and you say, what's the matter? Nothing, I'm fine. Well, that person is using a very, very sullen look. They are putting the wet blanket kind of energy, the very negative kind of energy out into the room, but then they're denying it. And so they draw a lot of attention to themselves, but people often don't know how to handle it very well. And if you try to talk to the person about it, that's why I call it withdrawn trap, because they're trapping you in by being so negative that your attention is drawn, and then they wait for you to make a mistake and then they can nail you. So say I'm at home and I'm glowering and sitting in my chair and somebody says, "What's the matter, Sharon?" And I go, "Nothing, I'm fine." And then say you're the person talking to me, and so you look at me and you go, "Well, you don't look fine to me." And then I say, "Well, I was just fine till you started bugging me." So now you walked into my trap and I nail you. And this person is almost a little bit like the stalker in society, because they withdraw and then they set little traps and wait to kind of pounce on you if you make a mistake. So the third form of defense is counterattack, and the passive form of counterattack is when you justify your own position or make an excuse. Now, we all know the people that tend to be the excuse makers, and often this defense is simply referred to as the person who tends to be really defensive. They're always justifying, "Well, I'm really sorry I was late, but I ran out of gas, I forgot I didn't have gas, or somebody called on the phone, I had to take care of an emergency." And we understand that that person is making an excuse, and that is defensive. But I think a lot of times in our personal lives, and also very much in our professional lives, we use counterattack, justify, when we are giving real, actual reasons that are reasons that are legitimate. But what it does is it still puts us in a one-down position. So say you're working with a client and you're a professional, and the client says, "Well, why do we have to do it that way?" And the typical response is, "Well, we do it that way because of X, Y, and Z." But is that person, when they say, "Why do we have to do it that way?" actually asking a real sincere question? I don't think so. I think what they're saying is, "I don't want to have to do it that way." They're asking their question with kind of a double message in it. And so if you just answer, the likelihood of them saying, "Oh, okay, I didn't realize that, thank you for telling me," is pretty nil. Instead, I think that when we are in any way countering the other person's position by clarifying, justifying, or explaining ourselves, when that person is not coming to us with an open mind and an open heart and really wanting to hear what we have to say, then we will always still be functioning in a defensive way, even if our reasons are legitimate. And the final defensive mode, which is in the category of counterattack, is counterattack blame. And that's the person who turns things around on the other person all the time. If you raise an issue with them, they say, "Yeah, but you did this," or "It was your fault." And sometimes it's really aggressive. And there are other times that the person might be very soft-spoken. So one of the things that's really crucial in beginning to look at who is using the more passive counterattack and who's using the more aggressive one is whether they use the word "you" or "I." So, for example, one person in a meeting might say, "Well, I just don't think your idea is going to work." And the other person might say, "I researched it. I know this idea could work." And then the people around say, "Oh, well, don't be so defensive." And then, of course, that person's even more upset. But the person who's louder is not necessarily the person who's being the most aggressive. And I think this is a real key when we look at whether someone is using a form of counterattack that's simply self-justifying versus attacking or blaming the other person. I had a man say to me one time, "Oh my gosh, if I got rid of all my defenses, nobody would know who I was anymore. They wouldn't know my personality." And I think all of us use all these defenses. Sometimes I could run through all 6 in just a few minutes. Most of us have particular ones that I think we adhere to the most, we use them the most, and those are the ones that become on some level more attached to us, that seem much more like our personality. But I personally think that all of these defenses are like a false front. I often think of the kind of false front that's on old Western buildings in the old movies and things. That you're not actually seeing the real person. And most of us have talked to someone that maybe we didn't like very well, and suddenly one day it seems like they just dropped their defenses and opened up, and it's like, wow, it's like a different person. And so I think if we can learn to live without being defensive, that our emotions, our personality, our spontaneity, our creativity, all of it would become much more fluid. I love a quote that I heard from Lena Horne. And she said when she was younger, she was defended, and it was a survival mechanism. And as she grew older and became much more open and went through her own healing process, suddenly people would say that her music was so much more powerful and expansive. And she said they didn't know that for the first time they were seeing the whole Lena Horne.